Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's Hot Topic program, The Origins of Stone Tool Technology with Emma Finestone. My name is Briana Pobiner, and I'm a paleoanthropologist and educator at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. I'm a brown and gray-haired woman in a black shirt wearing headphones in front of a Zoom screen with an African savanna photo with grass and an acacia tree behind me. Whether this is your first time joining us or you've attended before, we're so glad to have you here. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. This discussion offers closed captioning. You can turn the captions on or off via the CC button, which should be located at the bottom of your Zoom interface. We're in a webinar format, so we can't see or hear you. As you have questions, please go ahead and submit them to the Q&A box, which is at the top or bottom of your screen. It looks like two speech bubbles, so we can sort through as many questions as possible. The Q&A time really flies by. The Q&A box is also where we will share relevant links during the program, so keep an eye out there for those. We'll start with an opening presentation by our speaker, Emma Finestone, and then I'll join her here to take your questions. During the presentation, I will also write answers to some of your questions, at least any that I can answer, as will another member of our behind the scenes team, Dr. Ryan McCrae. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Dr. Emma Finestone is the Associate Curator on the Robert J. and Linnet E. Fritz Endowed Chair of Human Origins at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. She uses archaeological fieldwork to investigate adaptive shifts in the human lineage that relate to the early manufacture and use of stone tools. Dr. Finestone's field projects in Eastern Africa span evolutionary change over the past 3 million years and focus on reconstructing the mobility, range expansion, and landscape use of tool makers to illuminate how early tool technology facilitated the spread of human ancestors around the globe. She studies some of the earliest known stone tools, which were used to butcher hippos more than 2.6 million years ago. And now I'm excited to ask Emma to share her presentation with us.
Thanks so much, Briana. I'm going to share my screen and get started. There we go. Okay, so thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to give this talk for the Smithsonian Hot Topic series, especially because the Smithsonian Human Origins program has been really integral to my work and to my career. And some of the research that I'm discussing today is all possible because of the Human Origins program at the Smithsonian. I've worked with Rick Potts, who's the director of the program, for many years, and I'm just really happy to be here and give this presentation. So the question that's really at the core of human origins research is this question: what makes us human? Who are we? What makes us similar to other animals, and what makes us different from other animals? And this question has driven centuries of research in paleoanthropology, but it's not just a question for paleoanthropologists. It's a question that everyone, regardless of whether you're an anthropologist or not, has thought about at some point. So what makes us human? Certainly our anatomy is part of what makes us human. We evolved to walk upright, which is something that no other primates do, and we evolved large, complex brains. But I think that it's our behavior, more than just our anatomy, that has really set us apart and is part of the integral answer to this question of what makes us human. We use culture and technology to solve adaptive problems. We make things, we build things, we use language to communicate our thoughts and our ideas. And this photo on the right is from Cleveland, but anywhere on Earth that humans are, you will find tools and culture. The ability to make tools is an integral part of what makes us human, and for a long time, scientists thought that the ability to use tools was what set us apart from other animals and was part of the definition of what it means to be a human. But in 1960, Jane Goodall observed chimpanzees termite fishing, and since then, this idea that humans are the sole tool users has been just taken down to the extent that we now know that even non-mammals use tools. So we aren't the only animals that use tools, and many primates use tools. They even will use stone tools for pounding and create accidental sharp cutting flakes that look a lot like the stone tools that we consider uniquely human. And even the archaeological record of primates goes back in time, where archaeological assemblages produced by Capuchins go back 3,000 years. And again, we now know that a lot of other animals, birds, even octopus, not just primates, use tools. So it turns out that tool use is not the universal feature of what makes us human and sets us apart from all other animals. Still, I think what we do with our tools is pretty remarkable and unparalleled in the rest of the animal world. We use our tools to survive on every continent on Earth, and we build cities that are visible from space. Some of us even use our tools to go to space and look back down on Earth and capture photos with a tool like a camera so that everyone can see it. And that's something that no other animal, no capuchin, no chimpanzee, no octopus is doing that. So I would argue that tools are still a huge part of what makes us human if we consider the scale that humans rely on tool use. We're a technologically dependent species, and that is part of what makes us human and what sets us apart from other animals. So if we're to break down the features that make us human, these are the ones that I'd really pull out. We are obligate tool users. We need to use tools. We don't just sometimes use tools because we want to. We depend on tools for survival. So our reliance on tools and technology is part of what makes us human. We also use these tools to access nutrient-dense foods. Our tools allow us to access a variety of plant and animal materials that we would be unable to access without the aid of tools. And the degree of meat eating, especially eating large mammals, is unknown in any other primate. Primates will occasionally hunt and eat meat, specifically chimpanzees, but they're not doing it on the scale that humans are. So our tools allow us to access resources that are often very nutrient dense, and we wouldn't be able to access them without tools. We've also used our tools to expand globally across many different diverse environments. We live in hot climates, cold climates, we live on all continents, we live at high altitudes and low altitudes, and that's enabled by our tools and technology that we bring with us to help to overcome environmental challenges. And finally, the ways that we use tools to change and modify and shape our environments leave lasting impacts on planet Earth on an enormous scale. The scale with which we alter our environments using our tools is unparalleled in the rest of the animal world. And so we can trace the origins of these behaviors that make us human back millions of years in the geological record to when hominins first began bashing together stones to form what we call flakes, which is visible. This tool on the bottom is a flake. It has a sharp cutting edge. So hominins were able to manipulate rocks, use both their hands to fracture off something like a flake that was used like a Swiss Army knife. It has a sharp cutting edge and it can be used to cut plant and animal tissue. So they were using stones to produce stone knives, essentially. The stones used to percuss other tools to initiate that fracture are called hammer stones, and that's what's shown on the left. And then the stones that were flaked are called cores, which is shown on the right. And these larger stones were often also useful in pounding behaviors to break open harder food items like a nut, for example, or to break apart animal bones to access marrow. So given the importance of tool technology to our lineage, which has been recognized for many years, it's this question of who invented tool technology has long been debated in our field. And there's not really an answer to it, although a lot of my talk today is going to be presenting as much information as we have to answer this question. So who is the one who started this trajectory of tool use that results in the tool technology we have today that's unparalleled in any other animals? Which hominin was the one that started manufacturing tools that jump-started this technological revolution? Initially, the earliest stone tools were known from Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania. They were studied by Mary Leakey and also Louis Leakey, and the tools were discovered in bed 1 at Olduvai Gorge, and they were initially credited to the robust OH5 cranium that was found nearby. At the time, this was known as Zinjanthropus, and the nickname of Zinjanthropus was Nutcracker Man, for its distinctive skull morphology, which included robust jaws with large post-canine teeth. Their molars are enormous. They're the largest molars of any hominin, and they're about 4 times as large as our molars. And their cranial features also support robust chewing musculature. So this nutcracker man was found in the same bed at Olduvai Gorge as these early stone tools. And so this was presumed to be the tool maker for just about 1 year, until a year later, the discovery of another hominin at Olduvai Gorge, one with smaller teeth, a slightly larger brain, and hand morphology that suggests manual dexterity. It challenged the idea that OH5, the nutcracker man, Zinjanthropus, was the tool maker. And this new fossil, OH7, became the type specimen for Homo habilis, named Handyman for its presumed tool-making ability. And hominins belonging to Homo were certainly skilled tool makers. However, recent findings have suggested that other hominins also engage in stone tool use, especially at the earliest archaeological sites. Since the discovery of OH7, OH5, OH24 came a little later, this is still in the 1960s, and our understanding of the hominin fossil record has drastically expanded since then. And we've filled in a lot more information about who the potential early tool users might have been. So on the tree of human evolution, and this is depicting a branch showing the human lineage, which is the split between us and chimpanzees happened about 6 million years ago. So anything that lies on our side of the family tree is considered a hominin. The tree of human evolution now goes back 6 million years. And the earliest hominins were the early bipeds. So these are potential hominins that reveal the body plan that was closest of the last common ancestor shared between humans and chimpanzees when they split. These hominins were similar to other apes with brain sizes and body proportions that were fairly similar to a modern chimpanzee. They lived in forested habitats and they would have spent a lot of time in trees, but they arguably were able to also move on 2 limbs while on the ground. And these hominins could have certainly been tool users. Chimpanzees are tool users, but it's likely that they were using tools that may not have fossilized or been preserved in the geological record. Like the tools chimps use are generally sticks or stones that are unmodified, and those things we wouldn't be able to recognize as tools. So these could have been tool users, but it is a little too early to consider them as candidates for the earliest stone tools. The next group of hominins is the Australopithecus group, and this is a diverse and successful group that encompasses a high degree of species richness, which means that multiple species are represented in the fossil record and often in the same region. They also had small brains that were similar to earlier hominins and comparable to chimpanzees, but their ability to walk upright like a modern human is even more developed, and that's evidenced by their skeletons and also preserved footprints that verify that they used successive bipedal steps when walking across a landscape. Next, we have the Paranthropus group, and this is the group that Zinjanthropus belongs to. So Zinjanthropus has since been renamed to Paranthropus boisei. This group consists of 3 different species, and all of them are our cousins, not our direct ancestors. This group was an offshoot lineage that eventually went extinct, leaving no descendants, and our own ancestors survived. All of the 3 species of Paranthropus have this nutcracker-like features. They have enormous teeth, they all have huge jaws, they have strong chewing muscles, and they likely used these features to eat tough and fibrous foods. And finally, these branches culminate into the group of hominins that all humans belong to. We're part of the Homo group, although modern humans are the only living member of this incredibly successful group. There were many different species represented in this group in the past, and I actually only have some of them on this slide. The number of species in genus Homo, first of all, is currently still debated, but also it's changing quite a bit, and there's new species of Homo that are argued for on a regular basis. So I chose many species of Homo, but likely there are way more species than this. And of course, it's just based off of our knowledge of the fossil record, which is a very limited snapshot into the past. So this group was incredibly successful, and there were multiple lineages living at once. And like us, all ancient members of the Homo group were tool users, and they would have used tool technology to access new food items and take advantage of new food resources, expand into new habitats. And it's this group that dispersed out of Africa into new environments and evolved a much larger brain and more human-like body proportions compared to the previous hominins. Now, technological milestones that are important emerge over the course of hominin evolution. The first major technological milestone is the appearance of the first stone tools, which are called the Lomequian industry. The Lomequian industry is the first core and flake technology. It appears 3.3 million years ago, but it's localized to a specific region in West Turkana, Kenya, and it disappears from the fossil record. So we have the Lomequian known from just one region at one point in time, and then it disappears. The next technology is the Oldowan, which is going to be mostly what I'm talking about for the rest of the lecture. The Oldowan is what I study, and it's the first widespread tool industry, which means that where the Lomequian appears in one region and then disappears, the Oldowan tool industry spreads across Africa, out of Africa, at many different sites, and it persists through time for over 1 million years. So the Oldowan is the first persistent and the first widespread tool industry, and that also consists of core and flake technology. Now, around 2 million years ago, we start to see expansion into new environments like out of Africa and also into high altitude environments. Environments can range in this time period from open grasslands to forested environments, and hominids exploited a wide range of resources from aquatic resources. And there's also evidence of persistent carnivory, where the record is stratigraphically stacked in a way that we know hominins were returning to the same spot and hunting and scavenging carcasses for hundreds to thousands of years in the same place. And around this exact same time, we see the appearance of the Acheulean, which is the longest lasting industry, and this is usually characterized by bifaces. If you think of hand axes, this is the Acheulean industry. Then finally, around 800,000 years ago, you get control of fire. It could be earlier, this is debated, but control of fire definitely comes after the very first stone tools. And this would have allowed hominins to cook their food, which would have allowed them to process it more easily and extract more nutrients. So as you can see, these technological milestones span a long period of time and overlap with many, many different hominin taxa. So it doesn't just appear as one step in the evolution of becoming human, this reliance on tool technology. There are many phases that appear across the duration of hominin evolution, and they all ultimately culminate in the behaviors that we have today. So I'm going to be briefly talking about some of my research on the Homa Peninsula in Kenya. The Homa Peninsula is situated on the shore of Lake Victoria, and there's a carbonatite complex that's a volcanic complex at the center of the peninsula. This carbonatite complex makes it very difficult for us to date sites because the type of volcanic activity doesn't produce crystals that are necessary for argon dating. But we have a variety of really amazing sites with beds that outcrop around the Homa Peninsula. And I'm going to be talking specifically about one locality called Nyanga, which is estimated to be between 3 and 2.6 million years old. Now, I'm just one person on an enormous team that's working at Nyanga, and partnerships with many institutions have been integral to this research, including the National Museums of Kenya, the Human Origins Program at the Smithsonian, and Queen's College. And Tom Plummer, who leads this work, actually gave a hot topic lecture on Nyanga. So if you're interested in learning more details about this site, you should check out that lecture. Nyanga, so this is showing the Nyanga locality. It's situated on the modern lakeshore of Lake Victoria, and there's a gully system that opens into a large amphitheater with deposits from the late Pliocene. In the past, so in the late Pliocene, it would have looked a little different, and this would have been a really appealing spot for hominins. Activities would have taken place alongside a stream channel, and there was also a nearby freshwater spring, which would have provided a water source for hominins. There would also have been plenty of woody cover, shade, and then a range of food resources, including both plants and animal carcasses. And overbank flooding from the stream is what buried the record of hominin activity at Nyanga. We find most of the record in fine silts, so this is consistent with rapid burial from overbank flooding. And the results of 2 excavations that were carried out at Nyanga were published in 2023. One critical finding at Nyanga is that it preserved among the oldest stone tools, and these tools were characteristic of the Oldowan industry. So before the discovery of the Nyanga locality, the oldest Oldowan tools were known exclusively from the Afar Triangle in northern Ethiopia, which is about 1,300 kilometers away. So this was a range expansion and also possibly a time expansion of the Oldowan industrial complex, because the oldest Oldowan sites are 2.6, which is just the bottom end of the range of the Nyanga estimated age. So millions of years ago, hominins would have produced these tools. And what's also extremely interesting about these tools, and this is just kind of a teaser because I have a paper in revision that will be coming out at some point, but it's not out yet. Something that's really cool about the Nyanga tools is the diversity of raw materials that they used to manufacture these tools. And many of these raw materials don't appear to be locally available at the Nyanga locality. The carbonatite complex at the center of the Homa Peninsula produces very soft, low-quality raw materials for making tools. The edges are dull easily, so you'd have to discard them. They also would make less efficient pounding tools because they're dull, and much higher quality, more durable raw materials are available about 10 kilometers away. And it does appear that a lot of the Nyanga material comes from those more distant sources. Those are quartzites, a type of rhyolite. There's also a lot of quartz in the Nyanga assemblage. So that research will be forthcoming. But usually with these Oldowan assemblages, there's one rock type that just dominates the whole assemblage, and it's usually pretty local. But at Nyanga, you have so many different raw material types, and some of them are coming from further away. Now, we also have evidence of butchery of hippos. So hippopotamidae elements are present in each excavation, and they're associated with stone tools. In the main excavation, so this is an artistic representation of butchering a hippo, and this is then a photo of excavation 3. So that activity becomes buried by the channel overbank flooding, preserves this hippo, and also 42 stone tools that were associated with the hippo. That includes both flakes and also larger cobbles that were used for battering and cores. And this is excavation 3, and I'm going to show a few more photos of the associated stone tools with the hippo bone. This is a pounding tool nearby a hippo foot. This is part of that scatter that I showed on the previous slide. Here we have a hippo long bone with a stone flake underlaying it. This is a hippo scapula, which is a shoulder bone with a stone flake right up against the hippo. They're literally touching each other. So the stone tools are right up against the hippo fossils. This is actually excavation 5. So the previous photos were from excavation 3. We have a scatter of different hippo elements. We have part of a foot, part of the shoulder, part of the pelvis. These likely would have been brought there or moved by hominins because the hippo skeleton wouldn't, anatomically, you wouldn't get a heel right next to a shoulder. So they were likely moved around a little bit in the course of processing. But when we lifted up this innominate, directly underneath it was this split quartz cobble that had battery damage on the outside. So it's likely that this cobble would have been used to process a hippo. So beyond being closely associated with stone tools, we know that the hippos were butchered because there are marks left behind on the surface of the fossils that are indicative of butchery. These long striations that are shown in the images on the left and then the top image on the right are the marks that you expect to find when a flake is dragged along the surface of a bone to deflesh a carcass and access the meat. We also find evidence of percussion on the bones on the bottom. So the hippos are on the left. The bones on the right are from bovids, and the bone on the bottom is a bovid long bone shaft fragment that has both cut marks and also opposing flake scars. So the opposing flake scars indicate that it was pounded. So it's likely that this bovid, they accessed meat from one side, and then they were able to pound apart the bone and access bone marrow at the center. So it's really cool. We have these old stone tools, early Oldowan industry. We know that they were being used to butcher hippos. We also know that they were used for plant processing because of the use wear on the edge of the stone tool. But what was a little unexpected is that we found these tools and the butchered hippo associated with a member of the genus Paranthropus and not a member of the genus Homo. We found 2 Paranthropus teeth at the Nyanga site. The one on the top is a surface find, and it's the largest hominin tooth ever found. The one on the bottom is broken, and neither of them are attributed to species, but they're attributed to the genus Paranthropus based on their morphology, their cusps, and their size, their enamel thickness. And the one on the bottom was actually uncovered in situ in excavation 3 at the same level as the Oldowan stone tools and the butchered hippo. So this is very interesting because we actually don't have any fossils from any other hominins. This is the first hominin found on the Homa Peninsula, actually. We don't have any fossils from genus Homo. So we don't know that genus Homo was in that area at that time, but now we do know that Paranthropus was there. If we had found genus Homo associated with these Oldowan stone tools, I think it wouldn't even be a question that everyone would say, okay, well, Homo was making these tools at Nyanga. But finding Paranthropus there and not Homo, it opens up the question that could Paranthropus have been using early stone tools? Perhaps could they have even been the ones that made the earliest known Oldowan assemblage? Of course, more work would be needed to confirm this because it's still possible that we could find genus Homo in this area at this point in time. But as of now, it's really interesting that we have Paranthropus associated with this assemblage and not genus Homo. So this really raises the question, which hominins made stone tools? And short of finding a hominin hand holding a tool, we really just have to make hypotheses about tool makers from their temporal and geographic overlap with hominins and early archaeological assemblages. So we have to look at the overlap in order to answer these questions because it would be great to get lucky enough to find a hominin hand holding a tool, but that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So I published a paper recently looking at the overlap of hominins with Oldowan assemblages and also a little bit talking about the Lomekwian assemblages to try to answer this question of who made the earliest tools. And if we look at the Ethiopian Rift, the hominins that are at the Ethiopian Rift are members of genus Homo, which are in red, and members of the Australopithecus group, which are in yellow. Now, the Oldowan record in that region overlaps pretty well with the regional appearance of the Oldowan overlaps well with genus Homo. So the regional appearance of genus Homo and the regional appearance of the Oldowan stone tools in the Ethiopian Rift are a pretty good match. And there's also direct evidence that link Oldowan tools with genus Homo. In the Hadar Research Project area, fragments of a hominin maxilla that were attributed to Homo were discovered alongside Oldowan tools that date to 2.33 million years ago. And so this was found alongside stone tools. And then in the Ethiopian highlands, a mandible from a hominin infant that was attributed to Homo erectus was discovered in association with Oldowan lithic assemblages. We also have found at Gona between 1.6 and 1.5 million years ago, a cranium attributed to Homo erectus that was discovered alongside both Oldowan and Acheulean artifacts. So it's clear that Homo was making and using Oldowan tools in the Ethiopian Rift, and in fact, Paranthropus isn't present in this region. Some have argued that Australopithecus gari may have been a tool user. Now, the eastern the eastern branch of the Great Rift Valley contains some of the most well-sampled localities for both ancient hominins and also stone tools. There's a lot of rich diversity in fossil hominins, and this includes species from Australopithecus, which is in yellow, Paranthropus in orange, and Homo in red. And Kenyanthropus, which is I'm grouping it a little bit with Australopithecus, is a hominin called Kenyanthropus platyops that has affinities to Australopithecus, but is currently named in a different genus. And the artifacts found at Lomekwi 3 from West Turkana, Kenya, these Lomekwian artifacts precede the appearance of genus Homo, not just in the Eastern Rift, but anywhere that's known. So it is most likely that these Lomekwian tools would have had to be made by an earlier tool maker, because genus Homo is not alive at the time that the Lomekwian tools appear. Australopithecus afarensis is a candidate for the Lomekwian tools, as it's widely dispersed across Eastern Africa during this time period. But Kenyanthropus platyops is exclusively known from West Turkana and has been found at the same locality as the the Lomekwian tools from Lomekwi 3. So it's possible that either of these could have been the makers of the Lomekwian. The Oldowan industry in this region, there's both Paranthropus and Homo present, and there's actually quite a bit of overlap between Paranthropus, Homo, and Oldowan tools. The majority of sites are found in places where both Homo and Paranthropus co-occur, with the exception being Peninge and also Nyanga, which was the locality I was just talking about, where we only have Paranthropus. However, it's clear Homo was in the area around the right time, so it's still an open question how many assemblages might have been Paranthropus or Homo. Was it just Homo? But this evidence seems to suggest that it's a possibility that both taxa might have been using stone tools. And then finally, in the cradle of humankind, this is where a suite of sites are located within a 6-kilometer radius in southern Africa, and they preserve Oldowan tools alongside hominin fossils and fossil fragments. This includes Australopithecus in yellow, Paranthropus in orange, and early Homo in red. And the Oldowan industry here, again, has quite a lot of overlap between Paranthropus and Homo, although Paranthropus are found at more sites, and so similar to the Eastern African sites or the Eastern Rift sites, this suggests that really either of them could have been making or using these tool assemblages. Although, again, in both of these regions, it's clear Homo is making and using tools. All members of genus Homo seem to be tool users. The question is whether Paranthropus was also engaging in tool use. So to summarize what we can deduce from the overlap of Oldowan and Lomekwian assemblages and early hominin tool makers is that the earliest stone tools predate genus Homo. So it's pretty likely that genus Homo wasn't the only genus that was making and using stone tools. Paranthropus and Homo often co-occur at Oldowan sites, and Paranthropus is actually the first association between Oldowan tools and a hominin, because Nyanga is the oldest association and only Paranthropus is found there. Assemblages north of the Omo Turkana Basin are exclusively linked to early Homo, so that's the Ethiopian Rift, and also sites out of Africa, which I didn't really discuss. But there's very strong evidence that Homo was the producer of sites that exist out of Africa and also in the Ethiopian Rift. And Homo is the only genus that's widespread enough to encompass all of the Oldowan industrial complex. So again, we're pretty confident Homo habilis and especially Homo erectus were making tools, but the question is, were they the only ones and were they the first? So rethinking this handyman, certainly Homo habilis deserves its name. It was a tool maker. It overlaps substantially with a number of Oldowan assemblages. But it's also possible that Australopithecus and also Kenyanthropus might have made tools and been responsible for the earliest stone tools ever made. It's also possible that Paranthropus, which is the first hominin found in association with stone tools, was an important tool user and tool maker. Despite our surprise at this, because one of the reasons people are surprised is because they have such large teeth and such heavy chewing musculature, why would they have needed stone tools to process their food? I think we need to start thinking more about scenarios of Paranthropus tool use and what expectations we would have from the fossil record and from their dietary signatures if they were tool users. Now, finally, I want to point out that we shouldn't just rethink Homo habilis as the handyman because of Paranthropus and Australopithecus. We should also just be a little conscious of the fact that handyman implies that it was more the male individuals that were making and using technology. And that might seem a little nitpicky, but actually the majority, almost all of the depictions of the early Stone Age are male individuals or male-dominated groups that are making stone tools. I collected data on every image that was depicting the early Stone Age that appeared on at least 15 websites and categorized these images according to who was making the tools, male or female, and also recorded the number of websites that the image appeared on. And what we find is that the number of web pages, it's over 3,500 that are males only, and there are very few depictions that are reproduced on websites that show either female-dominated groups making tools or female-only groups making and using tools. And this is kind of counter to what the evidence from our closest living relatives in genus Pan would tell us. In genus Pan, which is chimpanzees and bonobos, it's females that use a broader variety of tools, engage in tool-related behaviors more frequently, and also demonstrate greater proficiency. They also play a really key role in transmitting culture to the next generation. So when we're thinking about who invented tool technology, I think that recent research has required us to take a step back and reassess, was Homo habilis the first tool user? How important could tool use have been to other hominins, and perhaps which group members were using tools? And likely it was all of them, but we should think about female tool users in addition to male tool users, perhaps more frequently. So this is my final slide, and it depicts all of the early hominins. Even Ardipithecus is on here because I think tool technology takes root very early on in our evolutionary history, before we even find the archaeological indicators of tool use from flaked stones. It's likely that multiple species engaged in tool use. In fact, I wouldn't even say it's likely. It's impossible for only one species to have made stone tools because there isn't one species that would overlap with the entire range of the early Stone Age. And so tool making appears to be yet another adaptive milestone in human evolution that developed over time across many different taxa rather than emerging as a species-specific breakthrough. This is a common thread in human origins research. The more we learn, the more we realize that these things that made us human didn't arise all at once as one step towards becoming human. It was the combination of a mosaic of different features that come together over the course of human origins and come together across multiple species of hominin that create the behaviors and the anatomical features that define what we are today. So I have some further reading that I wanted to provide people with. These are academic papers on this topic if you're interested in learning more. And finally, I wanted to thank you for listening, and the Smithsonian Hot Topic program and the people leading that for inviting me to speak and just being very organized with this whole process. And then finally, I want to thank the institutions and the funders that have made this research possible.
Thank you, Emma. That was fantastic. And we have a bunch of questions that have come in already.
Okay.
So I think we'll go ahead and jump right into the Q&A. And actually, several of the questions sort of came in before, but you've started to address some of them, but I thought we could just talk more about them. So the first question that came in before you started talking about this topic was from Rosie, who says the artist's sketch of Nyanga hippo butchery depicts only male hominins. Is there any evidence suggesting that butchery was confined to males?
Yeah, so that question came before I began. That's great. I love that people are noticing that. And I wish I could find artist reconstruction of hominins butchering hippos that have female hominins participating, there aren't that many representations of hippo butchery in paleo art, so I couldn't find one. But I also decided it was okay to keep those earlier images that showed males only, because it was kind of laying the groundwork for an argument that I was going to make later.
Mm-hmm. So excellent. So it doesn't sound like is any evidence that only males would have like done
No,
butchery.
absolutely
Okay.
not. Again, our closest living relatives, evidence from our closest living relatives, also ethnographic research suggests that males and females would have both made and used tools. But even if we had to choose which one might have been more biased towards tool making, it would be the females. That's what evidence suggests, in my opinion.
Excellent. And actually, Urate asked a question later that follows on this nicely. She asked, in the capuchin monkeys, who you mentioned, do both females and males use stone tools?
That's a good question. I am almost positive the answer is yes, but I don't know so much about capuchin tool use. I'm sure that males and females are likely using tools, or else I would have heard about how only one of them does.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here's a great question from Sophie, who asks, do you think that direct observation of one species using tools by another hominin species was important? So like learning tool making through observation.
Yeah, I mean, learning tool making through observation is how the same species learns tool making. So children learn from their parents in humans, but also in chimpanzees and bonobos. That observation is really critical for learning how to do tool technology. So each individual isn't just inventing it once. It's invented and then they're able to see it and they learn how to do it themselves. I often think about how at these places where Homo and Paranthropus are both overlapping, it's also possible that some of them could have made tools, discarded them, and the other species could have picked them up and used them. I don't know how you would ever test that, but certainly if there's these sharp cutting edges that are available on the landscape that were manufactured from other hominins and you had a need for it, there's no reason that you wouldn't use it just because Homo made that tool, so I can't use it. So I sometimes wonder about whether these assemblages could have been used by more than one genus.
Interesting. We had one of our behind the scenes questions that we were thinking about was that you mentioned capuchin sort of stone tool assemblages. Are there other non-human primates or animals where tool assemblages have been found? And are there any that now I'm thinking, are there any where primates have been observed to pick up like tools or I don't know, naturally kind of broken rocks and use them as tools?
So what's interesting about primate tool use is that they don't ever use stone tools for cutting, even though you were asking which primates, it's capuchins, macaques, and chimpanzees are the main ones that use stone tools. So they use rocks for percussion. So they use naturally occurring rocks to crack open nuts, for example, and sometimes this can produce sharp flakes, but they don't ever use the stone flakes, which is interesting. So that's something that sets hominin tool use apart, is that we're intentionally producing these flakes and using it for cutting, but actually primates produce flakes too, but it's just the debutage. They don't care about it and they don't pick it up and use it.
Yeah, interesting. I think you answered this already, but a question that had come in was Urate asked, isn't the discovery of only Paranthropus, not Homo, also surprising at Nyanga? Because, as you mentioned, Paranthropus were also supposed to be primarily plant eaters.
That's an interesting question, and we do have a strong C4 signature from the Nyanga Paranthropus. So the diet appears to match what we would expect for Paranthropus. It's actually interesting because it's a very early signature of strong C4. So it shows that at least at Nyanga, Paranthropus was already a C4 specialist. C4 is a photosynthetic pathway that is grasses and open grasslands have more C4, savanna environments. And so Paranthropus is known for being very C4, whereas Homo is more of a mixed C3, C4. The Nyanga Paranthropus appears to have a normal diet compared to other Paranthropus, at least according to the carbon isotopes. What's interesting with isotopes is you can't get at trophic level. So a hippo technically would be C4 because hippos are consuming C4 resources. Now, I don't think hunting was particularly important to Paranthropus. I wouldn't make that argument. Of course, we don't know, but it is possible that the signature we're picking up from Paranthropus could be partly from animals that were eating the same resources eating those C4 resources. Yeah.
I'm going to ask one of our behind the scenes questions before I go back to some audience questions. So we talk a lot about these early stone tools being used for butchering. Do you think any of them could have been used for hunting? And if so, is there limitations on like what kind of animals might have been hunted?
Yeah, that's a great question. At Nyanga, we think they were scavenging, not hunting, but we don't really have the evidence we don't have the ability to test this because we don't have enough cut marks or enough elements you can help reconstruct whether it was, whether an animal was hunted or scavenged based on the locations of cut marks, the locations of carnivore damage, the elements of the animal that are there and what's missing. We don't have that ability at Nyanga, but it would be very unlikely. I think that as early as 2.9 million years ago, hominins were hunting a hippo. That would require a lot of coordination, and hippos are scary, and their body sizes are tiny at that point in time. So like, I would be very impressed if they were hunting the hippos. You do get evidence of hunting fairly early on. I think Canberra South, which I didn't talk about, but that's another site on the Homa Peninsula, is a good example of a place where they were employing both a mixed strategy of hunting and scavenging. So they were mostly scavenging larger animals that were either carnivore kills or died naturally, and then they were hunting smaller antelope, and especially juveniles. So if you're going to hunt an antelope, the small ones, and especially the juveniles, are the easiest to get to. That's not just true for hominins. Carnivores also kill the young individuals more frequently. So it seems like that those smaller animals and younger animals would have been what hominins were opportunistically hunting, and then they were opportunistically foraging animals that were carnivore kills, or they came across dead on the landscape.
And if I recall, the evidence for that is mostly on the like fossil animal bones as opposed to the stone tools. So you don't see like hunting style stone tools at that point.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah.
the stone tool edges, the microwear can tell us what type of contact material it was processing. And so we have evidence that they were processing animal bones from the edges of the stone tool, also evidence that they were woodworking, plant processing, but you can't get on the edges of the stone tool, you can't tell whether it was hunting or scavenging. You can just tell that it was cutting animal tissue. But it's the cut marks, the location of the cut marks on the bones and the elements that are preserved that help you to get at whether they had primary access to a carcass.
Okay. And yeah, one of my questions was going to be, can you talk a little bit more about that sort of use where, like, how does that work? How can you tell whether, from the edge of a tool, whether a tool was used for processing plants or butchering an animal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm answering it kind of on behalf of my colleagues who do the useware research. I have never done it I've never done it myself, but I've helped them with actualistic experiments. So I've gotten to see what they do a little bit. The team that does our useware is Cristina Lammarini, who's based out of Italy. And what they do is they create reference collections of the types of raw materials that we find at the assemblages on the Homa Peninsula, and they process wood and different types of plant material, different types of animal material, and then they form a reference collection that they compare the archaeological collection to see which it looks more like. And I know some people are working on doing quantitative useware. This is qualitative, where they're looking at it under a microscope. The type of wear can tell you about the contact material. And actually, they've been very good at being able to distinguish the contact material in blind tests of the experimental assemblage. So people are always a little skeptical about useware, but they assigned the correct contact material in a really high percentage of cases from the experimental collection. So we're also working on doing it for pounding. So like we're looking at useware for the pounding tools. So it's just a really nice line of evidence to complement the the butchered animal bones, because of course plant materials and wood wouldn't preserve in the archaeological record. So it's nice to get a sense that there seems to be more contact materials than just what is archaeologically.
So you mentioned about pounding, and I promise I will get back to audience questions, but there's a few more that we were thinking about behind the scenes. How can you tell pounding from like the edge of a stone tool?
So what we look for on a stone tool is there are pits that develop, and it's not just from pounding a few times. It takes many, many hours to produce these pits, and they're localized on a specific area of the rock. And also you can find even residue from the things that were pounded. That's another line of evidence that helps you know about pounding tools. So it's the damage on the rock and the pattern, the way that it's localized. And also, a lot of these pounding tools at Nyanga are not local. They come from 10 kilometers away, and some of them aren't flaked at all. So hominins are bringing them there, and then they're discarded with the hippo, and they would have been in the same place as the hippo at about the same time because it was buried rapidly. And it's a cobble that's not available locally, hasn't ever been flaked. Why would they have brought it there? It makes a lot of sense now that we see damage from pounding on the surface of those cobbles.
Excellent. That's really helpful. And you mentioned 10 kilometers. So one question that came in again from Urate, from how far away do you think the sources for the stones used at Nyanga was?
Yeah. Some of the sources are local, but it's only about 25% of the assemblage. The other sources, the primary sources of those rocks are very, very far away, but they're brought towards the peninsula with secondary drainages. So they end up being transported closer to Nyanga through rivers and streams. And that brings them all the way up to the Homa Peninsula, up until the point where the Homa Mountain, the doming of the Homa Mountain, prevents the flow of these drainages coming in from the east. And that's about 10 to 13 kilometers away from Nyanga, because Nyanga is situated not on the end of the peninsula that's nearest to those drainages, but it's pretty far from them. So it would be 10 to 13 kilometers.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So Stephen asks, is there evidence of resharpening of tools? You showed a shell in an early slide. Were these used in butchery?
Oh, cool. I think, well, the shell was with the octopus, I think. They certainly might have used shells, but we don't find them in the archaeological record, at least not in the early Stone Age. I do think that perhaps I was part of a paper that came out recently about how there's the potential that hominins could have used naturally sharp rocks before producing these flakes purposefully, and perhaps the impetus for producing flakes came from already using naturally sharp rocks to cut things. And so other materials that were naturally sharp, I imagine, could have been used to cut things as well. In terms of retouching, retouching is more common in the later Oldowan. You don't get so much in the early Oldowan, but we do have a few pieces that appear to be retouched at Nyanga.
Oh, cool. So here's a thought-provoking question from Linda, who asks, how much thought are we giving to the idea that tools might have evolved to process plants and carcasses for purposes other than food?
So one thing that we have hypothesized and said in publications is that they could be using tools to shape wood, like woodworking, which would produce another tool. So they could be using tools to make another tool, not just for making or for accessing food items. You also start to see using tools to build structures much later in time. It's like 500,000 years ago, but that's something that tools would have been important for using. Obviously, tools become important in the later Stone Age for a much wider variety of things, and also like working hide. In the early Stone Age, I do think most of it is probably centered around accessing food. In primates, that's why they're using tools mostly. You have this immediate need of needing to access a food item. Something like a hippo has such thick skin, you would never be able to eat a hippo well with just your teeth and your nails. So I think that food access was like the key to early stone tools, but they certainly might have also used these tools to make other tools, perhaps out of wood that wouldn't fossilize and we wouldn't find evidence of them. And they also could have been using tools perhaps to, sometimes I think about, did they make something to carry these cobbles around with? Not anything like dramatic, but I often wonder, how are they carrying these heavy cobbles tens of kilometers? Like, could they have something for carrying? We'll never know about those items because they won't fossilize. So the closest we can get is seeing evidence of woodworking from the useware, and that does tell us that some function of these early stone tools was not just food access.
Awesome, thank you. Here's a question from Momoko, who says, your presentation referenced tooth size in Paranthropus. Is there a reason that large tooth size would preclude the development of tools? It seems to me that these would be independent variables. Clearly, even though they would have used their teeth as tools, there would be many functions that teeth would not be capable of.
Yeah. And I tend to agree with that. I think just because they have large teeth doesn't mean that we should think that they're not tool users. I think the reason that this idea that large teeth indicates that there's not tool use is based on, in genus Homo, we see a reduction in tooth size over time as they rely more and more on tool technology. And so there's an assumption that your teeth will get smaller the more tools you're using. But I think Paranthropus wasn't using tools on the scale of genus Homo. And if they're just using tools opportunistically, I don't see why you would expect this huge response from their teeth to get smaller and smaller through time. And perhaps they were still using their large teeth to process certain tough and fibrous foods, even with the aid of stone tools. Their diets were different from genus Homo, and they might have needed large teeth whether or not their mastication was aided with tool use.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here's an interesting question from Catherine. Given that materials are being brought to specific sites from another distant location, does this suggest a certain level of sedentism?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we know that hominins are returning to spots on the landscape in the Oldowan for hundreds to thousands of years. They're coming back to the same locations. I think the fact that they're moving stones, though, from 10 kilometers away shows that they are ranging quite a bit. That's not an enormous range. That's not like outside the range of chimpanzees, but I don't think that specifically indicates that they were sedentary more than that they were mobile, because they're actually, like, it actually kind of shows evidence that they're mobile because they're collecting stones from these locations far away and then using them at another location.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I think we have time for one more question. So our last question is from Jay, who asks, are omnivores smarter on average than herbivores or carnivores? Aren't chimpanzees smarter than herbivore primates because they consume meat?
I wouldn't say they're smarter because they consume meat, and I wouldn't I think chimpanzees, it gets messy with how you classify these animal diets. It's not so clear cut. Chimpanzees are mostly only eating fruits and leaves, and it's only certain chimpanzee communities that actually even eat meat. It's not a universal chimpanzee thing. So definitely the chimpanzees that are not hunting are still extremely smart. I think there is something to the idea that you need to be smart in order to, if your diet is difficult and you need to come up with solutions, you need a lot of flexibility, that will make you smarter. But I don't necessarily think that fruit can be a resource that's hard to get. You have to find the right fruiting trees. You have to remember where those trees are in your environment. So I don't think that it's not true that a frugivore wouldn't have to be as cognitively advanced as an omnivore, because there's a lot of difficulty with food resources from a variety of different situations.
Yeah, that's helpful to remember. All right, well, thank you. I want to conclude today's fascinating virtual program. Please join me in thanking Emma for sharing her work with us. And I'd also like to give special thanks to those who made this program possible, to our behind the scenes team who helped sort through your questions, including Dr. Ryan McRae, who works with us in the Human Origins program, to our donors, volunteers, and viewers like you, and finally to all our partners who help us reach, educate, and empower millions of people around the world today and every day. We thank you. Next month on May 22nd, we will have our last spring hot topic with science writer Sandra Ackerman for a presentation on keeping up with human evolution. We've put a link in the Q&A where you can find information about upcoming programs and how to sign up for the museum's weekly e-newsletter. That's the best way to stay informed about upcoming programs and to learn more about the museum's research and exhibitions. After this webinar ends in a moment, you'll see a survey pop up asking for some feedback about the program. Please take a moment to respond. We're very curious to know what topics you might be interested in seeing for future programs, and we appreciate your input. So again, thank you to Emma, to our audience, and we will see you next month.